Hello and welcome to the CLB Forge podcast. This is the show to help equip you and your church for mission, ministry, and multiplying disciples. I'm Ryan Nilsson.
That was a great use of alliteration, Ryan. And I'm Mike Natal. We are your hosts. Welcome to episode 6. We are doing great, Ryan. Continuing to move in a positive direction.
Yeah, I think we're going to make it well over 7 episodes. I got a good feeling about this show.
We'll see how it goes. So today we are joined by a pastor who has been ministering in Minneapolis, Minnesota during the protests and riots surrounding the death of George Floyd. He's served as a missionary in Taiwan for 10 years, and now he serves the past 4 years as pastor of Ebenezer Lutheran Brethren Church in Minneapolis. Fun fact, he is actually broadcasting from a room that I have slept in. Interesting story, but we're just going to let that hover.
Wait,
I'm not even going to tell you the backstory behind it. We're just going to let it go. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's great. I've slept in that room that he broadcasts from. He's got his BS in economics and a master's in divinity from the Lutheran Brethren Seminary. He is a Christian reconciler through Ambassadors of Reconciliation. He serves the Christian community in personal peacemaking, teaching biblical reconciliation, coaching, mediation, and group reconciliation assistance. He and his wife, Chris, and their 3 teenagers live in Minneapolis, and you can find more information about him and his ministry at myebenzerchurch.com. We welcome Pastor Andy Larsen, S-O-N, to our podcast. I know. That's why I figured.
Okay.
It's in there as S-O-N, but he is S-E-N. So we are happy that you are here today with us, Andy. We have a little bit of fun on this podcast to kind of keep things lively and enjoyable. So we're happy that you're here. 2 E-Ns and I'm an L-E. So we're pretty close. I mean, we're relatively close within the alphabet to each other.
Mike, I think you're trying to push his buttons.
A-L-E.
You're trying to push his buttons to see how good of a Christian reconciler Andy is.
That's probably what it is. Underneath that is the truth behind it. Yeah. So thank you for unearthing that, Ryan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've seen worse.
I mean, really? You have.
Well, we're just getting started.
I'm encouraged by that you've seen worse than both Ryan and I.
Yep.
So that means there's hope for us.
Okay. Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Thank you, Andy. It's great to see you and hear your voice. Thanks for joining us. Andy, can you tell us the story about how you first learned about the protests and riots in Minneapolis, and give us a sense of how you're really close. Tell us a little bit about what that's been like for you and how close you are to what's going on or what was going on.
Yeah, George Floyd was killed Memorial Day night around 8 p.m. And we had just gone to the cabin out in the woods up in central Minnesota, and the campfire had turned into my therapist. I just sat around this campfire and just cleared my head because we hadn't gone anywhere since the pandemic, and so it was just wonderful to get away. The kids were just having a blast, just enjoying life. And on the way home, we leave Tuesday afternoon because the kids still had school, kind of, but it didn't really matter. So we're on our way home, and my wife gets a text from a cop that we know, and he said, "Yeah, there's something weird going on in your neighborhood. Something happened yesterday." And so that was our first clue. But I don't care. I'm just driving. I'm traffic. There's no traffic because of the pandemic, and I'm just cruising and just enjoying life with a smile. I get home, and I sit on the couch, and I'm still just smiling. I'm just so happy. And then I hear these choppers coming over our house, and look outside, and there's several news choppers hovering around 38th Street and Chicago Avenue, which is 6 blocks from our home. Wow. 8 blocks.
Wow.
And so I'm still smiling. I'm just wondering what's going on. And that was Tuesday. Wednesday night, things get a little bit scary. But that's what I heard. That was the first time that I heard, and my response was, "Oh, yeah, everything happens at Chicago on 38th." That was my first response. It was like, "Oh, this'll blow by." And nothing surprises me about that intersection. And once the protest started, I thought my initial response was, "Oh, now I just have to be careful about which freeways I take because they like to march on the freeways." And that was my attitude toward everything, just this non-caring, just annoyance that they were wrecking my happiness. That was sadly, my first response to what was
Wow.
going on. I hadn't even watched the video. I didn't know what was going on, but that's how I heard.
Yeah, Andy, thanks for that transparency too. That you're willing to share that, because a lot of times, as people are talking about what took place and how they feel about it, a lot of times they're speaking from uh, what has already occurred, as opposed to kind of living in that moment. And I really appreciate that you brought us to that point of, hey, here's what was going on. I was spending time with my family. We were coming back, and here's really the rawness of how I felt when I first heard about what exactly took place. So can you kind of take us through maybe what the first couple days and nights were like, as the riots began and as more news people showed up, and all that stuff that kind of surrounded. So it's close. I mean, this is really close to you guys as a church. So I'm wondering how that kind of impacted you and the people in your church for the first few days.
Once I saw the video, this is the third police killing that has happened since I've moved here, and so the other two, the videos weren't as clear and everything. This is just so clear. This is just awfulness, and once I saw that, I thought, I don't know, I didn't know what was going to happen, obviously, but like I was just sick. So those that's when my heart changed a little bit. Is that, oh, this is awful. Those the and then the violence started, and the change between night and day was so drastic. You could go for a walk during the day. You just business as normal until, oh boy, it started to be about 5 p.m. Things would just there was just this tenseness, intensity about the city. And I remember Thursday night, I was going to the church or at the office every day, and Thursday night, I just kept on hearing all these rumors. I mean, there was all these rumors that the electricity was going to get cut, that the cell phone towers were going to get cut, that um, yeah, and then perpetuated by our leadership is that these were outsiders that were doing all the looting and arson. And so through all this information, it's so hard to make a good decision. And so I leave the church building Thursday night, and I'm thinking, if I see you tomorrow, that'll be great, but I don't know, because the all the fires that had happened Wednesday night were 9 blocks north of the church, well, and along Lake Street, east. It runs east and west, and so we just didn't know, and there was
So
damage going all around us.
you were thinking that about the church property,
I was
the
thinking
building and
about the
everything. Yeah,
building.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, if you're here tomorrow, great. If you're
yeah.
not, it's nice knowing you. Because there was stuff going on all around us, north, south, east, and west. So you just didn't know. And with all the bad information, and with all the fear, just making a decision in fear is so hard. And I looked at our political leaders. They were doing news conferences at 1:30 in the morning, and you could just tell that they were just so tired or hyped up on caffeine and adrenaline. And I thought, I can't even make a good decision, and I don't even have all these people talking in my face. I can't imagine the stress and the pressure that they were going through, trying to make these huge decisions in a short amount of time. The National Guard came in Friday night. I could be messing with the days because just pandemic days are just weird. So they came in with 500 troops, and that didn't do anything. It got, I don't know if it got worse, but it didn't help. And then they just say, we're bringing everybody. And they never told a final number of how many troops came in, but I mean, there's 12,000 in Minnesota, but not all of them came. And finally, like, things cooled down on Saturday. And by then, neighborhood groups had formed, and it was so interesting. We were just going for a walk, and they said, and one of our neighbors said, "Oh, there's going to be a neighborhood meeting at the park at whatever time." And so we go over there, and there's like 120 of our neighbors there. And this is pandemic time. We haven't been in a large group in months, so it's just weird looking around and seeing other people. And the organization that took place block by block, and finally we just said, we've had enough. This is ridiculous. And so we set up people to keep watch throughout the night, and so we met a lot of people, and the community that formed because of this intensity, it was kind of amazing and good.
So it was like a group a group in the neighborhood that teamed up to protect the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at that meeting, everybody was pretty calm. They understood the protests, like, we all get it.
Mhm.
And that the violence was unproductive. That was kind of the mood. And we organized, set up shifts, and it was kind of amazing.
That park is that's the park that's like a block away from the church, right?
Correct.
That's the one that you guys met at?
My neighborhood park is a little farther away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, because I think I was part of Mission Minneapolis. That's the reason why I slept in that office. And I think that we held VBS at the park that you guys are talking about, which that kind of brings it back. And then a group of us cleaned out that park too as part of our mission outreach portion. So that's interesting that it's kind of bringing it together. So thanks for sharing that.
So you said, Andy, that people in the neighborhood weren't surprised about the protests and riots. Is that right?
Well, I
Or
don't
they
know about
understood it?
surprise.
Or
Yeah, they understood the protests. They wanted to support that. And I mean, making that distinction between the riots and the protests, I don't. It has to be made, and I just don't know exactly how to talk about that.
Yeah.
And because I know some people that were much closer to the fires and everything like that, and they had there were many cars, SUVs, and trucks without license plates just racing around the city. And some of them were caught, and they had accelerants in there to start fires, propane, gasoline, tubes of gasoline. And it was so intense. And there was a point that, do we stay? Do we go? What do we do? And then I tried to figure out, well, how do I get out of this city with all the roads closed and everything? And I just, the thought process, it took so long to process that. It was just such an intense time.
We just want to step back for a second out of this particular story, just to get some context with your background. You served as a missionary in Taiwan for 10 years, right? We actually just did an episode with Danny Bronson, who talked about his missionary experience and how that impacts his life here in the U.S. how would you say your background as a missionary, which I think would be a huge positive, but I'd love to hear from you. How did your background as a missionary shape how you interact with your church and especially with your neighborhood? Does any of that training come into play or your experience come to bear in those interactions?
Yeah, there's a couple assumptions behind just having missionaries. And one is that there are barriers to cross. And usually we think of physical, but like oceans and mountains and stuff like that. But the death of George Floyd kind of raised up all kinds of barriers. And the second assumption is that Christianity has something to say. So what are some of the barriers that were brought up? And here's one of the issues talking about this subject is that everything is incomplete. Like this is just one thing. This is a tiny thing, but this is one thing that has struck me. So many people look at the police and they say, well, the problem is systemic racism. There are issues so embedded and it's so difficult that nothing but drastic measures can be taken that could lead to growing trust. And another group says, no, 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 this is a personal responsibility issue. Get rid of the bad cops, take care of them, and that will bring about the necessary change. And as a mediator, as a missionary, I'm not going to take sides here. But these two groups, they hear each other, and they respond, well, no, you just don't get it. Like LeBron said to Drew Brees, you don't get it. That's insufficient. And the other side is, oh, you want to turn this into the wild, wild west. And then it just escalates. And that's a barrier. So what does Christianity have to say? I mean, simply, Christianity says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, what does that mean? In this particular example, it means understand what others are saying with the same intensity that you want to be understood. Try that. Understand others with the same intensity that you want to be understood. And wonderful things will happen when you do that. You'll be humbled, and that's good. And doing this is absolutely exhausting. So that's hard. And then we read Proverbs 16:2. It says, people may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives, which means I don't even understand myself, and yet I'm so upset when other people don't understand me. And so that adds a complication, another dimension. And thankfully, Christianity doesn't stop there. Christianity says there's a God who, even though he doesn't agree with you, even though this God knows that you are hostile to him, you go against him, this God sent his son, Jesus, to take the punishment that you and I deserve so that we may know God and be known by him. And nobody else can do that except God. And that puts us in such a good place, a humble, a gracious place. So these crossing barriers, the idea behind a missionary is crossing barriers because God has something to say. It's good and necessary right now.
Yeah, that's very impactful the way that you really frame that too. With people, I know one of the things that really has birthed out of not only the pandemic but also this situation with George Floyd, at least in my own personal life, I have grown to realize that people process things completely different than maybe I do, definitely different than I do. Even everyone, the way that they kind of interact or process. And I think that that's important to realize that. And I think as Christians, when we begin to realize that all people, even faith, is processed differently in a lot of people's lives. I mean, the one the one common denominator is Christ, and that's the thing that really is the bedrock and the foundation. But realizing that, I think, can be a powerful tool that we have in ministry as well. So when you were talking about your neighbors and kind of coming together, and that they understood about the protests, and you made that kind of clear that they were understanding that, I want to ask, what do you feel like the relationship is between the neighborhood and, say, like the police now? So it seemed like we kind of got an idea of how the neighborhood was processing the protests and even the riots too. But what's the overall feeling towards the police as well?
What's so interesting is that the Saturday before all this, we had an alarm go off at church, and the police were called, and I come over, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll have to wait for them. But they'd already done a perimeter check, no forced entry, and so I just approached them and say, "You want to get inside?" And like uh, other people wouldn't have done that, wouldn't have even dared to do that. It was getting to be dusk time, and so they couldn't see me clearly, and I was jaywalking across the street. Hey, hi guys, you want to go inside? And upon reflection, I thought that is something that a lot of people would not have done. And during that encounter, yeah, they checked the place out professionally, and it was from the third precinct, which was the precinct that these guys were from, and that dealt with George Floyd also. And so like you said, there are so many other stories that don't end like that. And so I've just been asking some of my neighbors, like, and every single one of them, every minority that I've talked to has an unfortunate story. Like it's not uncommon.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so this call for the drastic change in the police department, that's one thing. And then Minneapolis in April also did a huge change on their public school system too, which will change where a lot of people go to which school. And so there's all this change in this very short amount of time. And like I don't mind it. I like change if it's well thought through, which is really hard. But there's going to be an incredible amount of change in a short amount of time right here in our city.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, to kind of echo what you said, Andy, one of the things that was shared by one of my friends on Facebook was, just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. And that's one of the things that really you brought out, where you're like, I was talking to people of different minorities, and they all kind of have one of those stories. And then I think about your story where you're jaywalking across the street, and you're like, hey, do you want to just go, you want to go inside? And that is one of those things perfectly placed with, just because it hasn't happened to us doesn't mean that it's not happening. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind too, as we do ministry through difficult times like this.
Yeah, and minorities, they see, well, yeah, I can't say that. Yeah, we can just cut this out, right? That part, that's the first part.
Sure.
We'll just.
But I think that that's important too. To have that right there. I mean, Ryan will probably do his best to cut that out, but I think right there is a perfect point where
now I don't want to cut it out.
You thought of something to say, but then you thought through it, and you're like, yeah, I don't. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more time to be okay with being like, you know what? Maybe I would have said that maybe I shouldn't say that. And I think that that's really important to kind of work through that, because a lot of times, man, people can get into a lot of sticky situations by not thinking first. I think about that passage in James. I'm doing a Bible study with a group of friends through the book of James, and James encourages people um, to listen first and then speak. And I think about my own life, and I'm like, all right, I see what you're trying to do to me, Lord. And I think that we can learn from that. So it's totally fine to like have that like initial, oh, it's going to come out, and then you're like, let's dial that back, and then just let it go. So yeah, that's good. And I think that
What's
that's fine.
so
Yeah.
weird about this conversation is that, like, somebody could take anything that I say and just take it in the wrong way, or take it in a way that I didn't see, that I
Mm-hmm.
was totally blind to. And
Yeah.
that brings me back to my days in Taiwan where, oh man, I said so many stupid things. And I don't even like, you could just write me off there because, oh, his language skills aren't so great. But here it's, yeah, well, yeah, I'll get to that in a second. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I just appreciate everything you've shared. I don't want to ask any more questions. I just want to sit and think about
Mm-hmm.
what you've shared with us and what you've been experiencing. But maybe you could just, as we start wrapping this up, what I'm wondering, are there like one or two lessons or things you've learned during this time that we might benefit from knowing?
I've come to even see more clearly how confession is the only way to break the cycle of escalation. People might hear that and say, "Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to confess for what this country has done for hundreds of years," and that's a different topic for a different day. But are led to think that the only way for God to be able to do anything through this mess is if I treat people with disdain, and maybe they'll learn their lesson, and or just simply be disrespectful and flippant toward others. And the reason we want to that our hearts want to mislead and twist the truth is because we really don't believe that that God will come through. And so the more and more familiar we become with our own hearts, the more we'll see that, oh my, there is always room for confession.
Mm,
And then
yeah.
my dad just preached on Jesus seeing the crowds and having compassion on them. And I mean, these crowds are made up of all kinds of people. He still had compassion on them. He didn't agree with them. He didn't agree with them
Mhm.
100% on anything. And he had compassion on them. When we make agreement with people, the condition, oh, then, oh yeah, you're on my side, so I'll feel sorry for you. Or my heart will go out to you. And we don't see that in Jesus. Like, I just thought, would I have sacrificed my son for the sins of the rioters? And that just put me in a place where I saw the great love and mercy and compassion of our God.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot to think about, a lot to take in, for sure. Um, we I mean, I have one more question, but it kind of brings me back to that idea with Tony too, where we we get to the end of this conversation, and now I'm going to ask you something totally different, and maybe that's what our listeners need to hear at the end of this, is something a little different. And so, uh, since we're wrapping up at the tail end, I did want to give you a chance, Andy, to kind of tell us about the video series that you're putting together, to give us a little bit more information, maybe give yourself a little plug so that people can um, check out what you're working hard on. So you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
So if the last 3 months have taught us anything, it's that nothing is for sure, nothing is solid, and only the rock of Jesus Christ is. And so I'm encouraging people to gather 5 people who just don't know much about the Bible, much about Christianity. And these videos that I'm doing, they're found at myebenezerchurch.com, not org, com. And under Bible exploration, I love making up things. It's Bible exploration together with others, or B2. And we're walking through the Gospel of John, and we're reading it. And I just have one simple point, and I ask people, well, what struck you? Well, what do you hope that is true, that is within here? What are you struggling with? What do you think is probably not true? What are those questions that you have? What's funny is I posted my first one, and in walks our bug guy for the church, and I have the setup still up in my office, and he comes in. What are you doing? Oh, I just posted a video, and he watches it, and it did its job. We got into the conversation about the Trinity, and I can't believe that, and all kinds of things, and it was just a wonderful. It's a starting point for conversation.
Yeah.
Nice. So you said, just to make sure, you said bug guy, B-U-G?
Our bug guy.
Bug guy. Cool.
What's the right word?
I don't.
Exterminator.
Exterminator. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
That's fine. That's okay. See, so now that's the next type of thing that was brought up last episode. Danny talked about yuck ducks and yay ducks, and now you're talking about bug guys. So this is great. We're going in an animal direction with this podcast, which is always encouraging. So, all right, bring us home, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thanks for being our guest today. Thanks for sharing your heart and your thoughts on this. It's been humbling and quieting. It's just been so good for me to hear what you've experienced and hear your thoughts on it, and how you find the answers in the gospel and in Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for bringing us back to that. Thank you everybody for listening. You can find Andy at myebenezerchurch.com. And so go check that out. Thanks for being here and for listening to the show, watching the show today. Don't forget to subscribe. And we'd love it if you share the podcast with a friend or a colleague. So thanks so much. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.